Welcome to Adeptus On Air, the show where we examine how individuals and companies make decisions that drive their business and personal success. Each week, we connect with notable professionals who pull back the curtain on the industries that Adeptus has been on the cutting edge of for the last 30 years, including music, sports, and entertainment, as well as new emerging markets.
Welcome to Adeptus On Air. I'm Mike Hoffman, your host for today, bringing you a candid conversation with our guest, Ann Patchett. Ann, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
I'm so glad to be here, and I'm so glad that I don't have to talk about sports, psychedelics, and cannabis.
We can if you want, but that wasn't my intention for today. So I want to talk about what you do. And full disclosure, I think we were probably a little different growing up because obviously you were probably interested in your English classes and your creative writing classes and things like that, where I'm an accountant. So obviously my maths are what I enjoyed a little more. So I've always been fascinated, and I have this discussion. I have a college daughter right now and a daughter senior in high school. And when they're working on a paper, and I'm like, I don't know how you get a topic to like 10 pages because I can really be, I get to the point and I'm done in a page and a half. And when I read a book and the detail and the building of a character, I just have such respect for people that are able to do that because it is something I just do not have that skill set at all. I've always been amazed by it. So actually, I'll just jump right into that right now. What is your process when you are going to write a book? I mean, is the idea I'm gonna let me write a book, or does an idea come to your head first that leads you to actually put it on paper? Kind of what's that process before you start writing the book?
Yeah, and let me say, I can't do my own taxes, so this is what makes the world go round.
That's right.
Everybody has their own strength, and your strength is so not mine, and I'm so grateful. So the way I write a novel is I usually get an idea for a book while I'm writing a book, and I can spend 2 or 3 years just knocking it around in my head while I'm doing a million other things. It's like driving the car, walking the dog, and I'm always thinking, well, what would happen if this person came to town? And well, what if this person was a math teacher instead of a physicist? And and I put it together in my head slowly over a long period of time. The worst part of the process for me is when I have it all finished in my head. I know exactly how everything's going to go. And then I sit down and start trying to write. That is pure misery because the idea in my head is so fantastic. And then once I start putting it on paper, it seems awful. Every kid in school who's ever written a paper has experienced the same thing. You're just like, oh, it was so smart until I tried to write it. And now it seems stupid. And then I work through that. And then, it's just so much about showing up. I am 58 and I've been doing this my whole life. Mm-hmm. And when I was in college and in graduate school, I believed in talent and the muse and inspiration. Now I just believe in work. I just believe in showing up. If you can't figure it out and you sit there long enough, you will figure it out. But people get very stymied by the whole idea of the muse and, so.
And how has the process evolved over time with technology? Because I'm guessing when you wrote your first book, it might have been a little more difficult of a process as opposed to now.
When I was in school, I got my first word processor when I was in my second year of graduate school. Mm-hmm. And before that, so I was 22 probably. Before that, I had a manual typewriter in college. And all I can say is my back never would have made it. It was so horrible on my back and neck. And just having a nice little touch keyboard where things worked easily. I can remember so many times when I had a short story that I had written 3, 4, 5 drafts on the manual typewriter. And I would think I was finished and I would read it again and I would think, oh, I could really do that part better. And then just be like, hell no, I'm not going to type it again. I just cannot stand to type this again.
Yeah.
So technology means that I will go back and fiddle with a sentence for days,
Right.
and
It's really
I
helping
think
you. It
ultimately
helps.
make it better.
So besides the process, you think it's made your end product something you're much happier with because of the ease of edits and the availability to kind of go back and change it.
Yeah, I believe that. And there's certainly a lot of people who will say the opposite, who will
Mhm.
say that being able to work on a computer makes them lazy or sloppy, or they spend too much time tinkering. For me, I think it's just been nothing but an improvement.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Now, some of your books I know have kind of come from mainstream ideas or things in the news. And I was reading about a lot of your books and like Bel Canto, which is obviously one of your
Right.
better known books that kind of seems to have come from the news.
Yeah, the Bel Canto was very, very loosely based on the takeover of the Japanese embassy in Lima, Peru in 1995. And it was just a story I got really caught up with in the news and then wrote a novel about it. But you can get a little seed of an idea
Mhm.
from just about any place, and you never know where it's going to come from. Okay, now I want to ask you a question.
Yeah.
How has technology changed your
Oh
business?
my God.
Because that's got to be so much bigger than how it's changed my business.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, right when I first started, and to age myself, I started out of school in the mid '90s. So I've been doing this
Mhm.
now, almost 30 years, and that was right at the time where, and we'll just focus on tax returns. The new computers were kind of rolling out, and you were able to do a tax return. Granted, it was in a DOS format, but you
Right.
were able to do a return. The old days, when I talked to some of my older partners, they used what are called input sheets where they would actually almost input it on a sheet. They'd send it to a company,
Oh, wow.
they'd enter in the data and send it back to you. So think about how that would go, when there's a revision, or oh, I forgot to give you this charitable donation or things like that. So there was definitely that ease of being able to change things and update things. And time wise,
Right.
you had to have a much higher lead time
And
as
isn't
opposed
it
to now.
true in your business that basically the technology changes and updates every year?
Not
Both
even
what you're
every
getting
year.
from the government.
Not even every year. We get our software is updated from our software company weekly. Sometimes we get
Oh
two or
my
three a
God.
week because if you think about the beginning of COVID, what happened about in the middle of tax season, the administration came out and said some of your unemployment income is not taxable. Well, we started tax returns that tax season, it was all taxable. So now we have to wait for an update to actually update the returns. And some of the returns that were already filed, we had to go back and amend because these people were missing a deduction that we didn't know what wasn't in law at the time we did the return. So think about that one. That was midstream, a major change. So yeah, I mean, thank God for it. I honestly, I don't think without the technology, I would be doing this right now.
Yeah, I mean, all I've really got going for me is spell check at this point.
Me too. You don't think when I write a letter to the IRS or something, that spell check is very,
Yeah,
very important for me.
it matters,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. So some of your books, like Belcanto, actually made it to the big screen. Now,
Yeah.
what's the process of your book becoming a movie? Is it someone reaching out to you for this story? Is it you soliciting, movie? What is that process? Or at least what was that process for you?
Yeah. So a friend of mine once said that the chances that an option will turn into a movie that you will see in a theater
Mhm.
are statistically the same chances that a first kiss on a first date will turn into a 50th wedding
Oh
anniversary.
wow.
And that's about the truth. I have written a lot of books. I've had a lot of options.
Mhm.
Some things get made, some things vanish, but it's kind of like gambling. It's like if you were moving to town and you knew you wanted to buy a house, but you weren't ready to make up your mind. So you put a down payment on 20 houses
Yeah.
and you're only going to buy one of them and you're going to lose the down payment on the other 19.
Mhm.
That's kind of how the movie business works. So people are always putting in options on books and they then never get around to
Right.
making them. If you want to have the definition of somebody who is not seasoned in the industry, it's somebody who calls all of her friends and goes, "Oh my God, they're going to make my book into a movie. This
Right.
is so exciting." And I'm like, "They're not going to make your book into a movie."
Right. No, they optioned it, but doesn't mean that's going to go anywhere.
Right. But I'll tell you, especially back in the early days, that option money really saved me.
Oh, really?
And it's not a lot of money, a lot of times it's like $10,000 for 18 months or something like that. But back in the old days, that made a huge
Yeah.
difference and allowed me to finish the novel that I was writing.
Hmm.
And certainly I had some really interesting dinners over the course of my life with people who
Yeah.
never wound up making the movie.
Now, I was
Um,
reading the reviews of the over the weekend of the Bel Canto, both of your book and both of the movie. And you always, and I'm not a huge reader on it, like I said before, but when I hear people who saw a movie that was a book first, they always say, "Well, was the movie as good as the book, or was the book?" I've heard that 1,000 times in my life. I can say with that one unanimously, the movie did not even hold a little bit compared to your book. Is that the
yeah,
consensus you had heard on that one from the beginning?
right. But let me tell you, that was an option that went on for, God, I don't even know. It was like 12 years. It was so
Mhm.
long. And by the time they made the movie, I wanted nothing to do with the people who had bought the
Right.
option. Um, but that movie was released in 30 American theaters, right?
That's wow.
I mean, not chains,
Right,
right?
30 total
30
theaters.
theaters.
Yeah,
And
not
I
even
think
one
that
state,
it
right,
stayed in the theaters 2 weeks.
right.
And then it was on. The only time I ever run into anyone who's seen that movie, they saw it on an airplane. It wasn't on any streaming
Right.
services. It absolutely vanished without a trace. Um,
And it's funny because you would think the lead of the movie was Julianne Moore, or
right?
a major character who you would think pretty big name in the industry. You would think that that alone might get it into more than 30 theaters, just because obviously they're bringing her on, but I guess not.
No, and what everybody I knew, friends of mine who saw the movie said, it's not bad. And
Right.
that was the definition. It's not bad.
Yeah.
Um, but what's interesting about that story is that book was published in 2001.
Mhm.
It was probably optioned in 2002 or
Mhm.
2003. That was a time in cinematic history in this country where art house movies were huge. And it was just like this little bitty window.
Yeah.
And so you get an option amount, which is, like I say, like $10,000 for
Mhm.
18 months. It varies wildly. You don't get paid until they buy you out. And at a certain point, you, as the person holding the option, has a choice to not renew. So they had renewed several times. And then contractually, we got to a point where I'd no longer had to renew.
Right.
And so I said, I don't want to renew.
Mhm.
And because I wasn't crazy about the people.
Yeah.
And their only option then, the only way they could get it was to buy me out. And the buyout price, because the contract had been written in this micro moment in time,
Mhm.
was like, I want to say it was $550,000. It
Oh,
was a huge amount of money
life changing.
for an art house film.
Yeah.
If you optioned a novel like that today for an art house film, the buyout would probably be
Wow.
$200,000. If you optioned like the hottest zombie novel,
Sure.
maybe the buyout would be $500,000 now. So anyway, the whole thing was just a financial bath for everybody except for me.
Except for you.
And I did fine. So, I always think I have no complaints about that movie at all. No one
Oh,
saw it and I made a ton of money.
yeah, yeah. So going back to the book writing process, now obviously to get published, you need a publisher and all that kind of good stuff. What is the process there? Is it you kind of come up with your idea, like we talked about, you write your book, and then you seek publishers at that point, negotiate a contract with them, or is that going along at the beginning of the writing process?
Okay, so what you have is an agent.
Mhm.
And it used to be that you could write a novel and send it to Random House. Those days are absolutely over.
Mhm.
Nothing gets looked at a big five publisher unless it comes through an agent. So the thing that people really struggle with is getting an agent. I've had an agent since I was 21.
Okay.
So That's fine. That part's
Mhm.
done. And my agent handles all of the contracts, handles the foreign contracts. My books are published in over 30 countries,
Oh,
every one a separate contract. Film, opera. Bel Canto was an opera, or you have stage rights. I mean, there are just
mm.
all of these different things that happen.
And you've had the same
Um,
agent over the entire career?
I have had two agents.
Okay.
So I've, yeah,
Oh, good for you.
I switched about 7 years ago to a new agent.
Mhm.
So when I finish writing a novel, I send it to my agent. I am very happy with my publisher. They're HarperCollins. I've been
Mhm.
with them since 2000, since Bel Canto. So I know everybody, and I want to stay with them. So my agent just takes the book to them. What most writers do is they sell an advance before they write it. So maybe you've written 50 pages and
Mhm.
you have an outline. This is especially true with nonfiction.
Mhm.
Then your agent will take it to the publisher and they'll give you money in advance. I've never done that. The idea of it makes me sort of sick,
Right.
because I think if somebody gave me a bunch of money for something I hadn't done, the refrigerator would fall on my head and I would not be able to do it. Then I
Right.
would owe them money.
Yeah.
So I just wait until the book is completely finished and then I give it to my agent and then he sells it to the same people.
Mhm.
If I wasn't happy with my publisher, then the book would go out to auction and you would have 5 different publishers bidding against each other for the book. You can make more money that way. Um, but there are a
You're
lot of
happy
different
with
ways
what
to
you
get
wrote.
paid. And I like the people that I work with and I'm loyal to them and they have been very good to me.
Now, since you're now an established in the industry and so forth, would you ever anticipate a book that you came up with your idea that your publishing house would not be interested, or is it now basically, oh, it's Ann's book, we have a great track record with Ann, we're gonna run with it? Do you ever worry about them not being interested in your book, or have they ever said no?
No, I don't. No, they haven't, and no, I don't worry about it. I mean, for one thing, I know what a bad book is, and I have no interest in publishing a bad book.
Sure.
So
The
if
name of
I
it, sure.
think that my work isn't going well,
Mhm.
I'm going to abandon it, and no one is ever going to see it. And then I'm going to come up with something that's good
Yeah.
because really my name is my most valuable asset. But also, you build over the course of your career a readership. You think like you could ask that question to John Grisham.
Yeah.
Hey, John, do you ever just think the publisher is going to say no, not
Right.
this time? John Grisham could type up his grocery lists for the years
Mhm.
and everybody would be so excited to get a new
Bestseller next week.
volume.
New York Times bestseller list next week. Yep.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, once you have a readership
Mhm.
and you know what you're doing, it's not like at this point I'm suddenly going to forget how to write a book.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Now, are contracts in the business pretty standard? I mean, not without getting specific dollar amounts, or are there certain ways that you like to structure yours that might be a little different than others in the industry?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you asked because I actually do contracts in a way that very, very few writers do this, which is profit share. Now, the way that things normally work is you get an advance against royalties. So when I turn in my book, if I say, got $100,000,
Mhm.
and then every time I sell a book, I get 12% of the sale of that book, and it goes against the $100,000
Mhm.
until such point that I have paid that money off, and then I start getting royalties.
Mhm.
There are a lot of people who believe that you should never get a royalty, that you should get an advance that is so beyond what your book is going to earn out
That
that
you'll
you
never get to that next step.
you never get to that next level. I think that is really detrimental to the business as a
Mhm.
whole. I am very interested in the health of the industry.
Right.
So I don't want an amount of money that I'm not going to pay back,
Mhm.
but I also want a higher royalty rate. And
Okay.
so what I do is something called profit share, which means I don't take any money up front,
Mhm.
but I get 50% of my royalties after expenses.
Mhm.
One of the things that's really interesting about this, there are a lot of things that are interesting about it. Like before I had a profit share contract, I was always saying to my publisher, I want an ad in the New York Times. Well, I mean, ads in the New York Times are unbelievably
Oh, yeah.
expensive,
Yeah.
and there's no proof that they actually sell books,
Mhm.
but you want somebody to buy you an ad. But when you're the person paying for 50% of the ad, when my editor calls and says, okay, we want to take out an ad in the New York
Right.
Times, it's going to be $60,000. Your half
Right.
of it's going to be 30. I'm like, yeah, I don't really want to do that because I
Yeah.
don't see that ads are creating
Right.
sales. So it's a long vision. It's betting on myself. A lot of times your agent doesn't want you to do profit share. And this
Sure.
is actually the reason I switched agents at one point in my career, because the agent is more likely to want the sure thing. The agent
Sure.
gets 15% of
Mhm.
your
Yeah.
contract. They want the money up front. They are like, if we go to war next month, then nobody's going to buy a book and you're not going to have that money.
Yeah.
To which I think if we go to war and nobody buys the book, I shouldn't be getting the money.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
yeah.
All the
So,
risk, yeah, it goes to the other side.
yeah.
Very, very interesting. And as we talked about technology before in terms of your process, how has technology affected the end result? Meaning and we'll talk about your bookstore in a second, but obviously, nowadays with Kindles and ebooks and things like that, has that had a positive or a negative impact, do you feel, on book sales in general?
Well, that is a multi-tiered question, and it's hard for me to not think about it in terms of being also a bookstore owner.
Sure, sure.
But and somebody who deeply hates Amazon, although there are different ways to buy ebooks. The most important thing is I care that people read and not how people read.
Okay.
So that's my number one thing. My husband reads electronically. He reads on his iPad. He doesn't get his books from Amazon because that's part of the marriage vows for us.
Sure.
But he reads constantly.
Mhm,
He just really likes to read digitally.
mhm.
I don't, but I understand that. And there are, again, an explosion in audiobooks. So many people who listen to audiobooks. So, as an author, you get the highest percentage of royalty from an ebook.
Mhm.
So it's advantageous to me. It just if you're kind of splitting it down to the pennies, that a person is going to be reading my book digitally rather than in paper. That said, because I am a book lover, I would much rather people read the book on paper. Although, again, what matters is that they're
Is there
reading.
rating and so forth?
Yeah.
So about, I think, 7, 8 years ago, you opened a bookstore in Nashville.
11
11. Oh
years
my
ago.
God. See, I have my facts
Time flies,
down.
man.
11 years ago. Was
Yeah.
that a dream of yours? Always a passion that you wanted to do that? Or
No,
how did that come about?
no, it was never a dream of mine. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and
One of my favorite cities, by the way. I love
oh,
Nashville.
great. Thank you. Nashville, not the city it used to be.
Yeah.
It's getting hipper by the second.
Yeah.
But we had a great bookstore called Davis Kidd. It went out of business. It had been purchased years before by a chain out of Ohio, and the chain went under, and and we were left without a bookstore. We had a lot of used bookstores.
Mhm.
We had a Barnes and Noble. It was like 20 miles outside of town. We
Sure.
didn't have an independent bookstore. And I did not want to run a bookstore. I mean, I have a big job and a big business doing what I do.
Mhm.
But I met a woman named Karen Hayes, and we had a mutual friend, and she wanted to start a bookstore. And I said to her, I'll bankroll you. I'll pay for it. We can be 50-50 partners. You can have a stake without putting money into it, because she was going to be the in-store manager and I wanted her to be fully vested, and she did the work.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just that seemed great. And we went along that way for 10 years. And then she decided she wanted to retire last March.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, "Oh my God." She said, "I think we should just sell the bookstore."
Mhm.
I can't sell the bookstore because everybody in town, but also everybody in the country, thinks of this as Ann Patchett's bookstore. I've become
Sure.
kind of the spokesperson for independent bookstores.
Mhm.
So I ended up buying her out.
Mhm.
And now I own the whole bookstore. So I've gone from being somebody who never wanted to own
Sure.
a bookstore to owning half to now owning an entire bookstore. And I gotta say, I love it. There is a tremendous amount of joy in it for me, but this was not my dream.
Dreams change though sometimes,
They
and what makes it nice is that you really went from almost like a silent investor, meaning I'll fund you, you run
right,
it,
right.
to now, wow, I have no one really. It's all mine. But you know what? What I can tell from your voice and your comments and it's the sincerity is that you really value maintaining the profession
Yeah.
and people's love for reading. And for you, this is, I think, your way, one of your ways of doing that, and that's very admirable.
Absolutely. It's again, it's my interest in my industry
Mhm.
and the health of my industry and really understanding it, which as somebody who writes the books and then sells them,
Yeah.
and there are a handful of writers in this country that own bookstores.
Mhm.
Judy Bloom and Louise Erdrich and Jeff Kenny owns a fabulous bookstore. And I think that we all really understand the work that needs to be
Right.
done. Very important that we get books to kids who can't afford books. That's a big part of our
Yeah.
mission,
Yeah.
getting writers into schools, but just the
It,
sense of community. John Meacham published a new book this week, and we had his event yesterday. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I work the event, which means, there were a team of us. We go over, we load 400 books in a truck, we drive them across town, we unload 400 books, we're unboxing them. I mean,
yeah,
it's
you're good.
real labor.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
It's funny
and
you mentioned that because I told my wife. My wife's an elementary school principal,
oh,
and she's in an area that has some of the students have some economic challenges.
sure.
And I know Read Across America, when that comes up, she's always looking for children's authors to come in and not to donate their time to come in and kind of read a story, talk to them about writing and the importance of it, of literacy and things like that. But yeah, so when I said I'm talking to author, her first question is, the child author, are they in the area? Yeah, so I said no, unfortunately not. So it was just kind of funny. Her eyes lit up for a second yesterday. Oh, maybe we have an in to a guest speaker this year for Read Across America. But I end up
Yeah.
reading every year. She gets like some local kids at Rutgers, some of the athletes, at least to come in to kind of read, not necessarily people in the industry, because that's always a challenge to find those people.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, the people in children's literature are the best people.
Yeah.
The illustrators, the authors. I
Mhm.
mean, there is just a kindness and a willingness to
Yeah.
really work for kids that you don't see necessarily among the grown-ups. And
Right.
one
Right.
of
Right.
the great joys, I don't have kids, and I just was somebody who really didn't know very much about children's literature.
Mhm.
And since I've had this bookstore and I've met so many great authors and illustrators and really gotten involved with
Yeah.
children's literature, and now I have written 3 picture books, which is just a byproduct of hanging around with these people. It's been such a
I'll
joy.
have to check those out. I wasn't aware you did that. I'll definitely have to look those up. So since this is an accounting podcast, I kind of have to ask you a little bit.
Yeah,
So you work here closely with one of my partners, and you have
yeah.
for several times. Talk to me about what you think is important in a relationship with you, both individually, from your business, and now also from the bookstore perspective. Like, how is that relationship important to you, and and how does it help you in your day to day?
Okay, so when I met my husband 28 years ago, he had an accountant, a woman named Debbie Coleridge, who was a very good friend of his.
Hmm.
And when we got married, she became my dearest friend and my accountant. And Debbie she just had everything in our lives. Like
Hmm.
we didn't know half of what was going on the way people do. And
Yeah.
it was a really, really close personal relationship. And Debbie died during the pandemic.
Huh.
And it was just an unimaginable loss, both personally, but also, how do you run things?
Mhm.
Where are the
Yeah.
papers? We don't know anything that's
Mhm.
going on. And speaking of children's book authors, I called my friend Kate DiCamello
Mhm.
and I said, who do you work with? Because Debbie's specialty, I married into that relationship, but
Yeah.
Debbie really took a lot of time to figure out royalties and contracts and
Mhm.
everything that I needed. But I knew that when I was going to find somebody else to work with, it should be someone who was working with an author.
Mhm.
And because Kate is one of the nicest people that I know, I knew that whoever she worked with was going to be kind.
Right.
And again, my lifetime association with my accountant, who I loved like a
Mhm.
sister, was her enormous kindness. And I said, I've got to find somebody who's kind.
Mhm.
And so I found Larry Gidlitz.
Mhm.
And it's been perfect,
Good.
seamless, such a joy. When my business partner at the bookstore, Karen, retired, she had chosen her accountant to be the store's accountant. He was retiring at the same time she was retiring.
Right.
And so I asked Larry if he would then take over
Mhm.
the accounting for the bookstore as well. And it's fantastic to have all of that together.
Good.
But one of the things that I'm looking for, and this kind of goes back to the beginning of our conversation and what we were both good at school.
Yeah.
I'm looking for somebody who's not going to make me feel stupid,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I am stupid and I don't know anything.
Right.
Oh God, after Karen retired, it was the first time after owning the store for more than 10 years that I looked at anything,
Right.
because I just was like, I'm the silent partner, this is up to you.
And you trusted Karen, and yeah.
And I trusted her, and still, she was a flawlessly
Good.
trustworthy human being,
Good.
but that didn't mean that I understood how anything worked.
Right.
And so I had a lot of questions
Mhm.
that you would think anyone who had co-owned a business for 10 and a half years would have known the answer to those questions.
Right.
But I kept calling Larry and he kept walking me through, and was just really kind and never
Good.
condescending, and could explain things in a clear way,
Mhm.
and was tremendously helpful.
Good. Yeah. One of the important things that we try and stress is, we try and educate our clients to the extent they want to be educated.
Right.
Like, you want them to be, which I think it's super important you are, but there are some that say, listen, I'm giving you what I'm giving you, do it. Let me know what I owe and I trust you and that's it. And that's okay too. But I do think it's important that everyone knows what's going on in their business, at least one of the owners, but preferably more, because luckily you're able to ask your partner during the transition, your former partner, questions. And luckily you have Larry. But we've seen it not only in businesses, but in marriages where one spouse knows everything, one knows nothing, and God forbid something happens. And they're like, I don't even know what bank I don't even know what bank.
Oh,
I don't even know what retirement money did. I don't know if we had insurance. So yeah,
that is my marriage.
yeah.
And I have files. I take care of everything.
Mhm.
With giant signs on the front, our will is in
Yeah,
this box.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And, this is where all the banking information is. Because
Sure.
if I was hit by a car, my
Right.
husband,
Yeah.
he wouldn't have the passcodes to anything, so everything's labeled, everything is there.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, I'm so happy that you're happy with Larry. Larry's a real good guy. Great
Yeah.
accountant, but a better person. So what's going on now? When are you working on a book right now, or are you just focusing on the bookstore? What are you doing?
Yeah, I'm finishing a book, and I just wrote a novel, and what I do is I have a lot of really smart writer friends, and so I send the book to my writer friends, and I
Mhm.
get all of these notes,
Yeah.
and then I put them in, and I send them out to a new group, and I put the notes in. So I just got my last set of notes, and it's interesting because this is a book that is set in Michigan,
Mhm.
and half of it takes place in a summer stock theater, and half of it takes place on a cherry orchard. Two things I know nothing about. But I have a friend who knows about these things. And so I'm sitting here, and I'm at my desk
There you go.
with notes and bullet points saying, in Michigan, we say woods, not forest. We, you know,
Yeah, that adds to the credibility of for the reader. Yeah.
and that's such a huge thing because what happens if your facts are wrong, and these are really specific facts
Mhm.
about how
Yeah.
you harvest cherries. She grew up on a
Right.
cherry orchard, and when you leave the stems on, and the
Right.
sweets versus tarts, and all of this. What happens if you get facts wrong is that it takes the reader out of the narrative.
Yeah.
It means that at that moment, the reader stops believing you.
Mhm.
And they also will take the time to write you a letter and tell you that
Yeah.
you're doing it wrong. When I wrote Belcanto, there was a scene in which two people were playing chess. And I said he put his hand on the horse's head. And then later on, I said he moved the rook. I must have gotten 500 letters. I mean, no
Uh,
joke about that mistake. That one sentence in a
right.
chess
Now you
game
move the rook, your hand was on the horse. Yeah.
because it was wrong.
Right.
And his hand should have been on the knight, not on the rook.
Right.
And
Interesting.
people will really, really call you out. So it's my goal to get things as clear as possible, correct as possible, and then it goes to the publisher, and they have a fact checker and a
Mhm.
copy editor. But mistakes are like lice, and no matter how many times you comb them out,
Oh
there's
yeah.
still going to be some lice there.
Yeah. That's amazing. And I give you credit because you're writing a whole novel on something that you're admitting you don't know a lot about.
Right. But
Which,
that also is what makes life interesting.
no doubt, no
Belcanto
doubt.
was about South America and opera. I didn't
Right.
know anything about that either.
Right. Right. So it seems like it's a very diverse selection of topics, and it's not like you've established a character like a lot of the chains, and the same character goes into one murder mystery, the next murder
No,
mystery. You've
no.
already established the history. You have to take the time every time to introduce your characters and their motivations and their past, and that it's more fun for you, but it's probably a much more challenging way to go about it as well.
Right. But
Yeah.
it's got to be the same thing for you. You want to do things you haven't done before
Yeah, of course. Yes.
because
Like
otherwise,
this podcast.
right,
No.
right.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, you're my third recording. I have a few others lined up, so this is something I've never done before. So yeah, like you said, you talk to other people. I watched a lot of other podcasts, and I kind of took notes how I like what someone's doing, what I don't like what they're doing. What's their approach. Then you got to figure out how are you going to prepare. And the first two people I've talked to were my clients. So I really knew them well, and I'm their business advisor. You're a valued client of the firm, but not with me directly. And in fact, it's the first time we're talking. We emailed last
Right.
week. So it was a little different for me because I now, which I was glad to do, I had to really kind of take the time, which I wanted to do, to learn about you. So the others, I
Right.
could have just started the podcast go, and I could have talked to them for hours because I know about their personal lives, their business lives, as well as all the financial aspects. For you, obviously, I just knew kind of Larry had kind of filled me in about, which was a very high level thing. So yeah, this is me a little bit out of my comfort zone, but I've enjoyed it.
Well, and let me tell you, one of the main jobs that I have at the bookstore, which I have had
Mhm.
for the whole time we've owned it, is I'm the people who interviews visiting authors.
There you go.
I interview people
Mhm.
constantly, and
Yeah.
I will tell you, you're doing a very, very good job.
I appreciate it.
But a lot of what I do is I will listen to podcasts or watch interviews with an
Yeah.
author who's coming, and I think, what I'm really curious about is this thing that you're not asking them.
Yeah.
Because listening to other people interview is a great way to come up with the questions of what you think's missing.
Right. And that's the approach I think we're trying to take with this, because it is an accounting podcast. But I'm not going to hit you with accounting questions and business questions about your
Thank you.
method of accounting. Who cares? No one's going to want to hear it. So to me, I'm just trying to get out there, exposing people to different industries and different people. And to me, just to learn about different businesses. And what I liked about this is, like I said, the process of writing and how it gets from, up here in your head to actually potentially a movie or to a publisher or
Right.
onto your Kindle. And I think you've
Right.
done a great job of, kind of explaining that to me.
Good.
So Let me ask you one last question. Are you
Yeah.
website? Are you on social media where people can follow you?
That's a really funny question. So I personally in my life have never looked at social media,
Okay.
nor do I have a cell phone.
Wow.
And I don't watch television. I am really an old-fashioned person. However, during the pandemic,
Mhm.
one of the things that really struck me was people, I mean, the store was closed
Mhm.
and we were in there and you could call and get a book and we would put it in your car, we would mail it to you. And that was fine if what you wanted was an Ann Patchett book or a John Grisham book. If you wanted a known entity,
Yeah.
we could get it to you. All books are released on Tuesday,
Uh-huh.
which is like all horses leave the gate at the same time. So every Tuesday, all the new books would come in, and we had no way to tell people about the new books.
Yeah.
So we started an Instagram program called the Lay Down Diaries. And every Tuesday during the pandemic, I would get up there with a couple of other people who work in the bookstore, and we would talk about the books that were published that day. It became so popular that we still do it every
Oh,
Tuesday
wow.
morning. And it's hysterical because people used to come up to me in the grocery store and say, I read your book. I love your book. Now people come up to me in the grocery store and say, I saw you on the Lay Down Diaries. I watch you on Instagram.
Yeah.
And writers will come to Nashville and they'll be on the Lay Down Diaries and then they'll go home to New York and somebody will stop them on the street in New York and say, I
That's
watch you on the
hysterical.
Lay Down Diaries. I heard your new book was coming out. Th- That I can't get my head around, but it's really huge. I've started a new series in which I highlight old books that maybe
Okay.
you haven't read before,
Mhm.
classics or
Yeah.
something 20 years ago. My whole theory being if you haven't read it, it's a new book to you.
Yeah.
And
It's a great slogan.
we did, I did one a couple of weeks ago about a book that I love called High Wind in Jamaica that was published in the 1920s. We
Mhm.
got over 100,000 views
Wow.
for a book about pirates that was published in the 1920s.
Wow. 100 years ago.
It- so you never know.
Wow. Well, you answered my question. So perfect.
Yeah.
So
And we
thank
have
you
a
for listening.
YouTube channel. We've
Yeah.
got a YouTube
Oh,
channel
do
at
you? Okay.
Parnassus. So you can go and watch to your heart's content.
Awesome. Awesome. And I really enjoyed this time. I hope you did as well.
I
And,
did. Thank you.
and again, thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Adeptus On Air. If you like this episode, please subscribe and leave a review. If you have a question related to this episode or have a request for what you would like to hear, please email us at marketing@adeptuscpas.com. You can also find us at adeptuscpas.com online or follow us at Adeptus on social media. The views and opinions by the podcast speakers and guests are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of Adeptus. This podcast provides general information only and is not intended to constitute advice.